Welcome to this episode of True Scary Stories with your host, Midnight Chills. Story 1, Camping in the Woods. So, my best friend and I try to go camping once a year. We have been doing this since we were 13 years old. We've never really been truly scared or had anything weird happen until last year in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We showed up during peak season on the first night, and space was very limited. We were losing light, so we set up camp on a spot on the side of the mountain that was an absolute wind tunnel. Morning came, so we went into town, drank some beers, and goofed around until late afternoon. By the time we got back up to the mountains to switch our camping spot, we were losing light again but managed to find a more remote spot. We set up our tents, got the fire going, and started drinking again. Time goes by, and it's probably 1 a.m. when we see a flashlight aimed at us. Then it starts walking our way. We didn't think much of it and assumed it was likely a park ranger coming to talk to us about something, because who else would walk up to you in a remote part of the mountains at 1 a.m.? I don't know about you, but ever since I started camping, I've learned it's kind of an unspoken rule that you don't walk up on someone camping that late at night unless it's an emergency. Anyway, the person gets close enough, and we realize it's just some guy, probably in his early 50s, wearing a shirt and basketball shorts with his girlfriend in her 40s who is avoiding eye contact with us. The man immediately forces a conversation about nothing, doesn't acknowledge the time or his girlfriend, and his eyes were darting all over the place while we were talking to him about random stuff like what model or style of lantern we had and how cool it was. He's saying odd things, like how he used to be former law enforcement, completely out of context to the random conversation he started. Then all of a sudden, he pretends to land his flashlight on our tents and says, "Oh, that's where you guys are sleeping, huh? Cool setup." The way his eyes and flashlight were moving gave us both the feeling that he was trying to see how many of us were there and what we had on us or near us, because his eyes and flashlight kept scanning the ground around us. We were getting sized up. For what? I don't know. Once this guy sees everything around us, he kind of pauses for a minute, ends the conversation, and walks off into the woods. Once his flashlight disappears, my friend and I look at each other, and without me saying anything, he looks at me and says, "We're packing our stuff and getting out of here." So we did. This was the most unsettling thing I've ever had happen while camping. I think this guy was going to wait until we were asleep and come back. I just don't know for what, but I do know we were 100% being sized up that night. It might not seem like much, but if you've ever had a moment with another person who was sizing you up, you'll know what I'm talking about. Story 2, Creepy Hunting Encounter. I once held a hunting lease in Middle Georgia. It was an abandoned hunting camp that hadn't been used in several years. I'm not superstitious at all, but this place was legitimately spooky. It was miles down an overgrown dirt road and completely surrounded by woods. It's probably the most secluded place I've ever been. I used to hunt there by myself a lot, and there was always this weird sense that I wasn't alone out there. There was a locked gate at the front of the property, but it wasn't uncommon for us to find the front door of the cabin open even when the door was locked. That was pretty creepy, but that's not what this story is about. One evening, I was hunting down in a small valley by a food plot we had put in along a creek that bordered the property. From the minute I sat down, I had a weird feeling, like I wasn't in a safe place even though I was holding a .308 with ballistic-tipped rounds. I didn't feel like I was the top predator out there. I didn't see any deer while I was sitting in the stand, but the forest was abuzz with activity. Birds, squirrels, and other critters singing their normal evening symphony. Then, all of a sudden, silence. Everything just stopped. It felt like everything in the woods was looking right at me. It was getting dark fast anyway, and I was extremely creeped out, so I packed up my gear and started walking back up to the cabin. About 100 yards away, I had this feeling that something was coming up behind me. I spun around and pointed my rifle back down the path toward the food plot, and that's when I saw it. There was something standing in the middle of the path. It wasn't a person, but it didn't look like a deer or anything I've seen before. There was hardly any light to make out any features, but it almost looked like some kind of bipedal deer or something. It was just standing there, staring at me. I quickly made my way back to the cabin, packed up my stuff, and got out of there. I just let the lease run out. Never went back after that. Story 3. My wife stepped on something in the lake. A few years ago, when my daughter was a toddler, my wife and I used to take her to a nearby lake to picnic, swim, and just unwind. It was a peaceful spot. Quiet, not too crowded, the kind of place where you could easily forget about the world for a while. One afternoon, after we'd finished eating, my wife decided to go for a quick swim while I stayed on the beach with our daughter. I watched her wade out into the water, the sun sparkling off the surface. A minute later, she suddenly stopped and turned to me, shouting something. At first, I couldn't make out what she said, but her expression was off. Then I heard her clearly. "I think I just stepped on someone's face." I froze for a second, thinking maybe she was joking. But the look on her face wasn't playful. It was pale, almost terrified. She quickly started making her way back to the shore, her legs moving faster, like she couldn't get out of the water fast enough. When she got back to me, she was visibly shaken. She said that while she was swimming, her foot brushed against something soft, and at first, she thought it was a rock or a weird patch of seaweed, but when she pressed her foot down, she felt the unmistakable shape of a face beneath the water, a nose, an eye socket. She swore she felt the hollow of the eye. I considered going in to check it out, but something stopped me. The unease in my gut, maybe. We decided to pack up and leave right after that. The next day, the local news reported that a young boy who had been missing for days was found drowned in that same lake, not far from where we had been. He'd been there the whole time, just beneath the surface. To this day, my wife is convinced she stepped on his face. Story 4. I work in a haunted mansion. I'm a behavioral health technician, and I got a new job back in September at what's considered a luxury drug and alcohol rehab facility. The facility is a huge mansion that looks like a mix of the Banks Bel Air mansion from Fresh Prince or a mini White House. It's 3 levels, has 13 rooms, all with private bathrooms and jacuzzi tubs, a gym, 3 living rooms, a huge commercial kitchen, a ballroom, yoga studio, a doctor's office, a huge garden, and an elevator. My first week, 2 clients told me it's haunted, and I laughed it off. My schedule is 11 p.m. to 7:30 a.m., so the majority of the time, all the clients are asleep, and it's just me and a nurse in this huge house, so it's quiet. My office is on the 2nd floor, the nurse's office, along with the kitchen, and the huge pantry is on the 1st floor. The pantry is locked at all times, and the nurse has the key. A couple of weeks ago, the nurse comes stomping up the stairs, yelling at me, saying I scared her by hiding in the pantry. I'm confused because I hadn't left my office, and when I tell her that, she goes pale. She's like, "You weren't just in the pantry and yelled, 'Knock, knock'?" I said no. How could I be when you have the key? She walks out. 10 minutes later, I hear her talking, so I go down to her office, and she's down on her knees praying in Punjabi. At 6 a.m., the chef and handyman clock in and ask how our night was, and I jokingly say, "Casper scared Nurse J in the pantry." The chef says, "Oh, that's Kay if it was in the pantry." I'm like, "What?" He then goes on to say he's worked there for 15 years, and it used to be a retirement home, so a lot of residents passed away there. He named off certain residents and where their ghosts have been seen, saying they've always been kind, not malicious hauntings. Nurse J put in her 2-week notice and is no longer here. I hear footsteps, lights flicker, and the fireplaces randomly come on, but I haven't had anything actually speak to me like Nurse J did. My pay is significantly higher than average, and my supervisor says it's because he can't keep the night shift staffed. I think it's because it's haunted, and my pay is too good to scare me away. Thank you guys for listening to this episode of True Scary Stories. Sleep tight. Midnight Chills.